He needs to look the American people in the eye and explain in a larger sense what the struggle is all about. I think in coming to America, it would also help strengthen the spine of our colleagues in Europe. They're about to take a walk through hell in terms of the winter, and even if they get through this winter without shortages, they've got to worry about next winter, and we've got to all stick together on this.
Horrors that we could not imagine or don't want to imagine, they've endured, and they're winning. I think anytime someone can speak of that valor, that's a good message for the American people to hear.
Yeah, Republican Senators John Kennedy and Bill Cassidy weighing in on the significance of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to Washington today, where he's expected to meet with President Biden and address a joint session of Congress. And joining us now, White House Bureau Chief at Politico, Jonathan Lemire. He's the host of Way Too Early. Also with us from London, NBC News Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons. We have David Ignatius and John Meacham standing by. Jonathan, let's start with you and your reporting on how this entire trip came together.
Yeah, Mika, President Biden is one of the few Western leaders who has not made a trip yet to Kyiv. American officials citing real security concerns of transporting the American president to Ukraine. But there had been some hopes to have a face-to-face meeting. Some talk that it might have happened at the G20 last month in Indonesia, but President Zelensky opted against that trip to Bali. He had not left his country previously since Russia invaded. So President Biden, when he and Zelensky spoke on the phone a week or so back, invited him to Washington. And it came together pretty quickly. Over a matter of days, with only being finalized this past Sunday, did Zelensky agree to come to Washington today with a real element of risk here. He needs to be able to safely get out of Ukraine and then get back into his home country afterwards, with, of course, the invasion still very much ongoing. And there are a couple of target audiences here when Zelensky and President Biden meet. First, their day, they'll meet at the White House. They'll have private meetings, meet with the national security team, and then address reporters for a joint press conference late afternoon. And then Zelensky goes to Capitol Hill to talk to Congress. And this is meant as a sign of solidarity, of American support as this difficult winter begins, trying to reassure nervous European capitals about the economic impact of a lengthy war, as well as very clearly targeted at Republicans to keep this money coming to Kyiv, especially with the GOP about to take over the House. We will expect the president to talk about the giving of new weapons, over nearly $2 billion in military assistance announced just today, including those Patriot missile batteries, and Americans being able to train Ukrainians in a third country about how to use those batteries. But there will still be some disagreements, too. Zelensky and Ukraine want weapons with longer range to be able to strike it deeper into Russia, and the U.S. is still very reluctant to give those over. So there will be some points of tension today amid what is clearly a sign of solidarity. But Keir Simmons, I wanted to ask you about how this trip, do you anticipate this trip being received in Moscow? The U.S. has been so careful to avoid further provocation of Putin to anything that would trigger a larger response. How do we think Zelensky's mission, covert trip to Washington, is going to be received back at the Kremlin?
Well, badly, I suspect. I don't think Putin will be pleased to see it, to say the least. Jonathan, I think your reporting about how quickly this was put together is fascinating, because I think it shows us that it isn't just Moscow that sees Washington as where the action is. It's Kyiv as well. I think it indicates real concern with the Ukrainians that they need to maintain support, particularly from Congress, with this almost $50 billion aid package. Real concern that that support might waver. And you mentioned the difficulties in Europe. I mean, frankly, Europe's in political turmoil right now, with allegations of bribery against European politicians by states in the Gulf. So Europe is struggling, honestly, politically, and Ukraine needs Washington to continue to support. Jonathan, I think one of the aspects of this, again, is that idea that it's not just Russia that thinks that America is key to all this, it's Ukraine as well. brings you to a question which I think we really don't know the answer to yet, and that is what has Jake Sullivan been saying when he's been meeting with Nikolai Patrushev and Yuri Ushakov, those two key advisors to President Putin? We know there have been meetings. What has he been saying? How far has he been, or has he at all been stretching the idea that the US won't negotiate with Russia, that's up to Ukraine? Because I think in Moscow, to answer your question directly, we've said this many times, President Putin is looking at playing the long game. I think this, frankly, is likely to be a long conflict, and therefore what Ukraine needs is long, ongoing, consistent support from Washington. And that's what President Zelensky is trying to achieve right now. And that is exactly what President Putin doesn't want to see.
So, David Ignatian, given Keir and Lemir's reporting, I just wanted you to comment, if you could, on the timing and the risk geopolitically, the implications there, but also here in the United States, if there's anybody who can sway the apathetic, it might be Volodymyr Zelensky.
So, Mika, General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, since the beginning of this conflict in Ukraine, has liked to quote something that Napoleon said. It may sound a little bit obscure, but Napoleon said, "In war, the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1." Meaning the figure of this brave, defiant Ukrainian leader, standing, it sometimes seems, alone against Russian pressure, has an effect that really is more powerful in the arms on the battlefield. And I think we'll feel that today watching him at the White House and addressing a joint session of Congress, the sense of an embattled leader who represents the values that I think most Americans really cherish: independence, standing up to bullies. I do think for Republicans who've resisted additional aid to Ukraine, this is going to be more difficult to justify now with the personality of this, magnetism coming to the United States to make his case. I think for Europe, where people have wondered, can we hold together despite Russian energy cutoffs, Russian energy pressure, this will again be a moment of reassurance. I don't think the United States, I don't think President Biden is prepared to significantly increase the amount of aid that he's giving to Ukraine. The Ukrainians would love to be able to hit targets inside Russia. I think the message from these meetings will be no. The United States wants to avoid a direct conflict with Russia, and the same limits that have been there before will continue. Patriots will be a reassuring symbol of American support. How much difference they'll actually make when the Iranian drones, cheap drones, are being flown into Kyiv and other cities, I'm not sure, but it will be an important piece of symbolism. But the main thing I think people should take away from today is the physical presence of this extraordinary person who embodies the resilience of Ukraine, standing up to this reckless and illegal invasion. And I think people are going to want to identify with that, especially at Christmas time. People will feel here's an emotional symbol of everything that we really cherish during the holidays in terms of that individual toughness and spirit.